Good morning. Ooh, it is on. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our annual financial meeting. I want to say thank you to John Branson, who started this while I was on parental leave, and it's been such a huge gift to have the time and space to devote to the careful stewardship that our vestry undertakes of our parish resources, and then to have a time to look at the ministry that's upcoming in the year to come. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, we ask your blessing upon this meeting, and we give you thanks for those who are stewards of generosity entrusted to this parish, and those who are so faithful in the tiny details. In Jesus' name, amen. So thank you to our outgoing vestry chairperson of our finance committee, Brad Ross. You can stand and wave. We can clap, yes. And thank you to our ongoing treasurer, Alistair Nevius. You too can stand and wave. And thank you to our senior associate treasurer, Barney Varner, without whom our financial life would not move forward with the fluidity with which it does. And it's also wonderful to have Diane Macomie with us, who is our parish administrator. So it's always a good thing when you're talking about how you steward resources, how you deploy resources, how you align them. How are we aligning those resources entrusted to us with our mission and vision? And so we at the parish welcome you with an open door. We're committed to the university, to the sacramental worship of God, to growing as disciples of Jesus, and to bringing gospel witness into the world. And how do we do this? I will let you all read. And I'll also remind us that we've been undertaking listening sessions. Perhaps I missed it on January 26th, but perhaps you got to do the really cool word cloud activity, or maybe you've done it in one of the Bible studies or small groups that you've been in. And so we're actively listening and discerning for how we refine our mission and vision in this season as we move forward. I also think it's good to remind ourselves of our diocesan priorities and to look at how what we're accomplishing here in the parish dovetails with the priorities of the Diocese of North Carolina. And then we have some parish priorities that the vestry reviewed and committed themselves to in this coming year. So I'm going to turn over the microphone to Brad Ross to talk about our financial planning process.
Good morning, everyone. This is going to be a really good meeting because I have nothing but good news to share. So hopefully, if you have any tough questions, those can go to Diane and Alistair. But in the meantime, thanks to your generosity, and as Elizabeth Marie mentioned, the careful stewardship of those gifts you've entrusted to us, we really are in a great position as a church. What you see behind me is the same calendar that we presented to you last year. And I want to highlight this for you to show that there is a very structured process that we go through during the course of the year. So the calendar starts really in July as we start looking at the following year. But during the first 6 months of the year, we're evaluating monthly on a regular basis. So both the Finance Committee and the vestry looks at the results every single month to make sure that we're staying on track. And we progress through that budget development process as we go into the fall. And one point I really want to make on this slide is those of you who heard Elizabeth Marie stand up week after week and say, we're funded this far through the year and we're funded this far through the year. The reason that she does that is because it's absolutely critical that the vestry and the finance committee know what the pledges are going to be. that really helps us if you get your pledges in November, because that allows us to look at what we're going to be able to plan for to deliver a balanced budget for the upcoming year. So I want you to know that is connected to this whole process. So highlights, and there are a lot of them to share with you. I'm not going to name every single one of them. Some of these have gotten more attention than others, the solar panels being one in particular, but we've done a lot of other things in terms of taking care of the sacred space, things as basic as improving connectivity inside the building, or looking at our floors and repairing those where need be. So it's a very, we'll go through what we're looking for 2025, but the Buildings and Ground group really does a terrific job of leading us through those things that we need to do that are most critical, that we can afford, that we take care of those sacred spaces. The fall campaign, again, we hit a record, y'all. It was fantastic under Diane's leadership and the stewardship committee and the generosity of all of you. This is the highest amount that we've ever had pledged. And I often mention this in the vestry meetings. We hear a lot of other churches are really struggling. There are not people coming to church. There are not people giving to church. We are in a very, very fortunate position, and I hope none of us take that for granted. Certainly, the vestry doesn't take it for granted that you guys are giving, continuing to give generously and participate in growing the mission of this church. Faith in action. So again, we heard Karen today talk about reaching out outside the church and being very involved in helping the least of these. So $65,000 for community and global needs. The Legacy Circle, again, work being done by Diane and by David Ross. I call him my uncle. So we have 80 current members, including 14 new ones this year. And again, I encourage you, if you don't know about it or if you haven't signed up yet and made us a part of your lifelong giving, then I would ask that you talk to Diane and to David about that. During 2024, we received $640,000 from the estates of Gene French, Robert Lotz, Rebecca Warren, and Ed Yoder. This is very, very meaningful to growing our endowment and allowing us to continue to thrive as a church. So thank you to all of them. Mary Cat got to take her sabbatical. We have the blessing of Father Keith getting ready to take parental leave this year. So again, your funding allows that to happen. And then finally, we have outside of this church, we've supported almost $600,000 in ministry work. So again, as I said, there's a lot of highlights to talk about, and thank you to all of you who have made that possible. Oh yeah, we also had this little thing called an organ going on. We've all now had the pleasure of enjoying all of the hard work that went into making this possible. And it was not a small task. Of $3.5 million has been raised in either cash and or pledges thus far. So again, all in, the project came in at about $3.3 million, which the vestry had approved. In addition, we had an endowment for the maintenance of the organ going forward. You can see that we've taken a loan. We asked for permission from the vestry and ultimately from the diocese for up to $1.5 million, not knowing how the fundraising was going to go. We've taken 2 draws that have totaled $550,000. We don't plan on taking any more. And you might ask, how do those numbers add up? Well, we've got to allow for interest and other charges that go with that. So first of all, thank you to all of you who have given. Secondly, if you have outstanding pledges and you can accelerate the payment of those, that will help us avoid interest payments going forward. But we're in great shape and obviously enjoying the beautiful instrument. I'm going to turn it over to Alistair to talk about 2024, and then I'll come back and talk about what we're doing on the investment side.
Good morning, I'm Alistair Nevius. I'm your treasurer. Yeah, so got to get my glasses on. Thanks, Brad. And the only other thing I want to add about the organ is the third aspect of that was that there was a maintenance fund endowment that, thanks to a generous donor, has been fully funded. The Berthelot Organ Maintenance Fund, and that's going to have the principal preserved, and the income will be used for longer-term maintenance. Annual maintenance of the organ will come out of the operating budget. So I think that's it on the organ. So this is our balance sheet as of the end of 2024, showing a comparison with 2023 year end. And as you can see, we're generally in a strong position. A couple of things to note. The top line is the cash line, and that cash declined during the year, mostly because of the organ and bell tower projects. Last year, we had socked away about $2.7 million in a cash reserve to pay for the organ and the bell tower, and now we're down to $1.8 million after having paid for those projects, so that was money put to good use. And then if you go down to the line, third from the bottom, called timing and purpose restrictions, those funds have also gone down. Again, that's mostly the organ and capital funds, again, paying for the organ and the bell tower. But we have a strong position, and the only real difference from last year is that spending of cash on those big projects. Looking at our endowment in general, these are our donor and vestry designated endowments that have restricted purposes and restricted principles. The pie chart and the table are basically telling you the same thing. One is just for the more visually oriented. We have a number of funds, which we can loosely call our endowment, that have restricted purposes. And in some cases, the money was restricted by the donor when the gift was made. In other cases, the vestry has designated the fund for a specific purpose. And I think more of our funds are vestry restricted than donor restricted. But in any event, we have to honor the purpose of the restriction. And so these are set aside as our endowment. As Sabrina reported last year, my predecessor, Sabrina Olson, who may be in the room, Michael Hardy has done a lot of work over the past couple of years to organize the documentation of those funds. We now almost entirely have the documentation in place to show what the purpose is and what is restricted. That took a ton of work, and for his pains, Michael has now been named parish archivist. So be careful what you volunteer for. For reporting purposes, we group our many restricted purposes funds into four main areas, which are shown here: buildings and grounds, evangelism and university outreach, community outreach, and worship and program support. But each of these big categories has multiple specific funds within them. For example, worship and program support includes funds for the Altar Guild, for flowers, for the music program, and for other purposes, including that organ maintenance endowment fund that I just mentioned. Those are all kept separate in our books. Their income is used for those designated purposes, but for reporting purposes here, we've rolled them up into four categories. Income from some of these funds then goes to fund the operating budget, or accumulated earnings from some of these funds goes to fund the operating budget. And this year we've budgeted $118,000 in revenue from these funds to support appropriate line items in the operating budget. In addition to those funds, we have other donor and vestry designated funds that don't have restricted principles, so we could, and in some cases do, spend these down. The program fund is for vestry designated purposes. The capital fund is for capital projects. The special reserve has now been designated for the organ project. The church organ fund is also for the organ project. And the other category includes a number of small funds that have designated specific purposes. The two funds on this page that had big changes this year were the capital fund and the organ fund. The organ fund represents cash available to pay expenses for the church organ project, and as the bulk of the project occurred last year, obviously that fund went down. The capital fund is spent on capital projects, and I'm going to discuss the capital budget and the capital planning project in a little bit. But for these purposes, it went down this year mostly due to the tower remediation project, as well as solar panels and the lighting project, and a number of other small capital projects. As I mentioned, the Special Reserve Fund has been designated by the vestry to help fund the organ project as needed. And then if there's anything left over, I think it will go to the capital fund. Is that right? Yes. So the special reserve is money that the vestry had originally set aside to cover shortfalls in the operating budget. We have not needed that fund for that purpose for the last several years. We've had a balanced budget and had surpluses the last few years. So the vestry has decided to repurpose that fund for the organ project. And so I just want to show this slide. There's a lot of information on it, and I won't go into the details because Brad is going to talk about our investment plans going forward, but I just wanted to show this to you because it's a new feature. The investment committee, which sits under the finance committee, is now reporting quarterly to the finance committee and the vestry on how our portfolio is invested and what the results have been. And thank you to Carrie Frapont, who provided this or amassed this data and has been generating these reports. The investment committee is in the process of discussing what our asset allocation should be. You can see in the third table what it currently is, and the finance committee is discussing what our cash reserve should be. I think the takeaway here mostly is just that in the past we've had a set it and forget it strategy, and now we're becoming more proactive, and Brad can discuss that. We'll turn it back over to him.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, so this is a first-time slide. You've not seen this information before, and as we worked as a finance committee and as an investment committee, we thought it was pretty important that you understood not just where and how our money was invested, but how's it doing. And this gives you the opportunity to see those different assets. Again, currently, if you look in the middle chart, the Diocesan Common Trust is where we have the bulk of our money invested, and we had a good year with them last year. We have some money at Vanguard also, substantial amount of money at Vanguard that's invested also. And then if for the sharp-eyed among you who might be adding the 4 columns and saying that doesn't add up to the 387 gain, it doesn't. There's about a $25,000 difference, but that middle chart excludes the interest that we have from our checking accounts. So the numbers do true out and match up, okay? We'll be happy to take questions about this as we go through it, but what I'd like to do is talk about the investment committee a little bit. I talked about it last year that we had put one together. We formed 3 different sub-teams to really look at the work that we were going to do together. Roman, who is not here today, our former senior warden, led the team that put together the development of an investment committee charter. We'd never had one of those that was approved by the vestry. That is now in place. And also an investment policy statement. So we went out and solicited statements from probably 8 or 10 churches, really from around the country, to get sort of a best practice approach. We're also in the process of finalizing that. Tomorrow night's investment committee meeting, Tuesday's finance committee meeting, and hopefully the vestry meeting on Thursday night, we will approve a policy statement for the first time that I've been able to discover in the history of the church. So again, you can be sure that we have structure in place about how the committee is working as well as how the policy is being followed. We've already talked about the communication and reporting. Carrie's here. She did a terrific job of putting that last slide together for us. And again, we had not been reporting that information out, not to you, but we haven't even been telling the finance committee and the vestry. So they'll be getting those reports on an ongoing basis. And then finally, we had a due diligence team. So what we decided to do was to evaluate the current offering with the North Carolina Diocese Common Trust that we've been with for some time and look at alternatives. We looked at the National Church, and we also looked at a group called the Episcopal Church Foundation. We had specific objectives in mind of things that we were looking for in terms of flexibility, communication, options that we could use to move the investment portfolio forward. And we ultimately, again, went out and talked to about a half a dozen churches around the country who were using the Episcopal Church Foundation. We were also very fortunate that one of our committee members, John Watson, leads the investment team for the cathedral in Paris, France, and they had gone through this same process a year before us and ultimately selected the Episcopal Church Foundation. So being able to bank on that history really helped us as we went through our due diligence process. So we ended up selecting the Episcopal Church Foundation. We're in the process of transferring the money that we have with the North Carolina Diocese to the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I put together a slide that several people said is way too busy. There's more than 5 bullet points. But I wanted you to know that there were a lot of very compelling reasons why we went with the Episcopal Church Foundation. Anytime we're making a change like this, it's something that it's important to understand the basis for that. So we're really excited about that. One of the things that is a restriction that we have from the North Carolina Diocese is we had to give them 60 days notice, and we could only move our money at a quarter end. So that is actually happening April. In the month of April, we will make the transition to the Episcopal Church Foundation. They give us a lot more flexibility in terms of how we invest, as well as access to our money. In addition, they have some great services that are going to be supportive of Diane and David on the endowment creation side as well. So who is this group that I'm talking about? So they've been around since 1949. They only invest with Episcopal organizations. They've been partnered with State Street for the last 25 years. If you don't know who State Street is, they have a 4.4 trillion under management and 43 trillion under advisement. So we're working with a first-class, world-class financial organization that we will have direct access to. And the Episcopal Church Foundation has about 370 different clients. And I didn't mention this, but it was on the previous slide. Their endowment is about $780 million versus the diocese being at about 50. So again, we gain that scale and leverage as well. And they have outperformed the history associated with the diocese. So we're getting more services, net of fees, better performance. So we're really excited about what's going to be happening. I'm going to turn it over to Alistair to talk about 2025. And again, I know I threw a lot at you about the Episcopal Church Foundation and what we're doing, but if anybody has any questions, we'll be happy to take those at the end.
All right, so here's just a quick look at where we've been over the past few years and where we are going, or where we think we are going. Again, there's a table in the chart that show the same information. That in the chart, the blue is the budgeted amount for revenue and expenses. It's just one line because for the entirety of this chart period, we've had a balanced budget every year. The orange is revenue and the green is expenses. So if we look back over the last few years, 2020 was the first year of the pandemic. Revenue actually came in over budget that year. I think we got a grant as part of that, but that was a good thing. 2021, which also in the pandemic was a leaner year, but we still didn't run a deficit. We still had a little bit of a surplus. And from that low point, if I can even call that a low point, we've just seen growth from there on out. So thanks to the generosity of our parishioners, all of you, the 2024 revenues were well over the budgeted amount, as you can see. And that, coupled with careful stewardship of our monies, brought operating expenses in under budget by some $84,000. We had a large surplus. That surplus allowed the vestry to fund the capital and program funds at the end of the year and the general reserve. And it also allowed us to invest in our people and human resources initiatives. And even after that large $129,000 transfer, we still have a small surplus. The chart says $9,887. That is not correct. It is $9,635 because as recently as Friday, we were still adjusting the books. So the presentation was put together before the books were, but I think 9,635 is the final number. 2024, if you look at the chart, does not show a huge surplus because that includes the $129,000 transfer. But it's just, it's a real testament to this parish and the people in this parish that we are able to have such a strong financial position going forward. And then for the 2025 budget, we're budgeting for 6.6% growth, and that's due to the strength of the annual campaign. Here's a little bit of a look at the revenue side of that budget. Again, the vestry has approved a balanced budget. It's the biggest budget in our history, as Brad mentioned, just over $2.2 million, which represents a $139,000 increase over the 2024 budget, and a slight increase over our 2024 actuals, which you see in the first column. I'll note that the actuals column is the unaudited amount. Sabrina would want me to mention that it is the unaudited amount. We do go through an audit every year, and my understanding is that historically there are rarely any adjustments. So I'm quite confident in these numbers. But with the success of the fall campaign, which affirmed our commitment to our mission, we anticipate parishioner support to grow by a strong 6% in 2025. And as you can see in the pie chart, although there aren't numbers attached to it, parishioner support represents about 88% of our revenue. So we really depend on parishioner support to do everything that we do as a parish. And parishioner support includes both pledges as well as plate offerings and various unpledged contributions. And we're anticipating an increase of almost 117,000 next year in that. So that's great. The next line, which is the diocesan grants, is going down slightly. This is because the diocese supports two aspects of our parish, the campus ministry, and that amount is not going down. And then also they've been funding part of our curate expenses, and that is ending in July. It was scheduled to run for 24 months, and it did. We have budgeted, that does not mean the curate position is going away. We have budgeted to pay the curate through the operating budget to the end of the year. So we are getting less money from the diocese for that, but we are continuing to pay the curate. So that's a good thing. We saw investment income come in over budget in 2024. I think that was mostly thanks to, we had a huge pile of cash and we had pretty good interest rates, and so we saw a lot of interest come in. We've budgeted a smaller amount for 2025, still an increase over the 2024 budget. And now that we have an active investment committee and an active investment strategy, we're hoping to do better going forward. We did quite well just having money in the bank, but I'm hoping in the future we will do even better. And finally, the last line is the ABC sale, and other I think is building use, and that's going up some because we're no longer monopolizing this space on Sundays, but also ABC sale proceeds. I far exceeded the budgeted expectations in 2024, and so we've budgeted for a similar amount in expecting a similar amount of revenue in 2025. And then switching over to our expenses. So operating budget expenses fall into 8 large buckets, which are shown here. We're not budgeting for large increases in most areas. And as Brad mentioned, I mean, this parish really does a great job of stewarding the money and making sure that the expenses are not excessive in any area. As part of the budgeting process, again, as Brad mentioned, the various ministries and groups and staff members that are responsible for programs are asked to submit requests, and then there's a budget committee that builds the expense budget based on those requests and on how the annual campaign is going at that point. And again, and Brad hit this, but I'm going to hit it again, your pledges and your pledges early help us immensely in this process, because the more confident we are in how much revenue we can anticipate, the easier it is to accommodate various programs' spending requests. And I think in general, I think every area went up. Not everybody got everything that they had asked for, but I think in general, we were able to give increases to all the various areas. But just most of them are not going up a lot. The two that have the biggest are general and administrative is going up, partly to fund a new part-time stewardship coordinator position. That's Stephanie Jenks, who's working with Diane. The vestry approved that position, the creation of that position, toward the end of last year. And for 2024, it was funded out of the program fund. Again, that's one of those funds that the vestry has discretion to spend. And so for the small amount of time that that position existed in 2024, it was funded from the program fund. Excuse me. But for 2025, it will be funded from the operating budget. And the belief, I think, is that it will pay for itself because it is a stewardship, i.e. fundraising position. So the success of the annual campaign also allowed us to increase our salary pool for the clergy and staff, and without whom this parish would not function. So it's great that we're able to fund raises for people. We're also able to increase our nursery attendant hours, which I believe allows then families with young children to participate more in parish programs. So this is all good. So those are the line items with the biggest increases. The last line, which is transfer to capital, is a commitment to making sure that we're staying on top of needed repairs on all of our buildings. And the way that works, and I'm about to talk about the capital budget in more detail than you want, but repairs under $3,000 are funded from the operating budget. Projects over $3,000 but under $50,000 are funded from this annual transfer from the operating budget, which last year was $80,000 and next year is $90,000. And as promised, here is a discussion of the capital budget. These are just some of the capital projects that were undertaken this year. Tower remediation is one that we discussed. And again, some of the tower work was funded by the Oregon Fund, but some of it was funded by the Capital Fund because when the work was started for putting the antiphonal portion of the organ in, it was discovered that the bell tower needed a lot of work. It's 100 years old, is that right? It's old. I don't want to say it was falling apart, but it needed work. So a certain amount of work was done to get it ready to then have the work done for the organ. And so that was a capital project, that portion of it. The Yates roof replacement, I think, actually happened in 2023, but again, that was a necessary step in order to then allow for the solar panels to be installed, and those are up and running. And then the church lighting project was underway, and I believe with more coming this spring, is that right? Yes. So, so we look at the overall budgeting process as a financial planning process and not just a budgeting process. And So when we sit down as a budget committee, we're not just considering, how are we going to fund this year's operations, but we look at the parish's long-term financial health, and we look at the financial plan, and part of that is a commitment to care for our facilities, and that's where the capital budget comes in. As mentioned, the vestry has made a commitment to transfer funds every year from the operating budget to a pool of money that's set aside for capital projects that are under $50,000 each. This is a disciplined plan that allows us to fund projects without dipping into the endowment. And this year, we're transferring $90,000. Again, repairs under $3,000 are funded from the operating budget directly. So the Buildings and Grounds Committee every year, as part of this planning process, sets out their anticipated spending needs for the year, which are shown here. But they also have flexibility to modify that as events happen. So these are the projects that they're anticipating will be needed to be done this year that will cost less than $50,000. It's possible that something could pop up in the middle of the year that would knock one of these priorities off. But the nice thing about this system is the Buildings and Grounds Committee has the authority and the flexibility to stay on top of it. And as I understand it, it used to be a system where 1 million emails had to be sent around so that people could approve everything. And so we've gotten away from that. And so as long as it's under $50,000, they can dip into this pool of money and make sure that things get done. So that's actually, I think, a good system. But it only covers year to year. So as part of the planning process, Buildings and Grounds also maintains a 5-year plan for capital projects. This is the current version. So across the top, you can see that annual ongoing transfer from the operating budget. And that's anticipated to increase by $10,000 every year. So it was $80,000 last year, it's $90,000 this year, and so forth. And then below that are anticipated projects that are coming up, most of which exceed that $50,000 cap. Having this 5-year plan gives the vestry and the parish a heads up about anticipated capital needs. And then the Buildings and Grounds Committee, the Finance Committee, and the vestry can prioritize them and decide what will be funded and when. And all projects over $50,000 have to go through that process. The Buildings and Grounds has to have bids or quotes. The Finance Committee has to figure out how it's going to be paid for, and then the vestry has to approve it. And that long-term planning is a challenge, but if we keep this plan updated, then that lets us all know what may be coming and what the priorities are. If we're not thinking about them, then they're all just going to be unpleasant, unaffordable surprises. So we don't want that. One last thing, and then I'll take that question. This list is based, at least partially, on a capital needs assessment that was done in 2020, and I think. And then Alan Reimer tells me that there's another one coming up, I think this year. And so that new capital needs assessment may change what's on this list. So what you see next year may be different because there may be things uncovered that aren't anticipated. There may be things, it would be nice if there were things on here that the new capital needs assessment said, you don't need to do that yet. I'm not anticipating that, but it could happen. So this is a work in project process. And again, these projects are anticipated, but as they come up, they have to be approved on an ongoing basis. So planning is underway, and stay tuned for next year. Yes, ma'am. I have no idea. I have seen contactor chiller on that list. Oh, well, it's part of the HVAC, they tell me. So that's it. I guess I don't want to answer any questions, but Brad will, or Elizabeth.
I will help facilitate your questions. But see, you are listed as one to receive questions. There you are, Alistair. So as folks are thinking about questions that they might have, I want to remind y'all that next week I think I said this at the beginning, as we have our annual parish meeting, we'll be hearing back a step in the process of that listening session that we've been accumulating and accruing. Lila, yes. Yes.
Comment. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Sandy. Oh, you want to dueling questions?
Sandy actually has a microphone in her hand, so I'm going to let her speak.
I noticed on one of the previous charts, the chapel remediation was put off until 29, and I wonder what went into that reasoning. It just seems like it needs things sooner.
You know, you can look in the chapel and see where someone very kindly doing painting stopped and didn't get all the way to the ceiling, and you can never unsee it. I cannot answer that, but I can have a member of our Buildings and Grounds team answer that for you, Sandy. Thank you. Oh, great. We have a Buildings and Grounds committee member here who can answer this.
Alan, the king of Buildings and Grounds, is here, but I don't think he is. So, hi, I'm Sally Goodnight, and I'm on the vestry and a member of Buildings and Grounds. So, as we sit down with this list, we are doing a needs versus wants, is it okay right now? Is this something that we can think about and look at? Is the space functional? Is the space safe? These are the big things that we are looking at. Also, is it something that doesn't utilize resources, whether they're in the building, environmentally well? So we sit down and we look at all of that. And Alan, who is the king of Buildings and Grounds, and who goes around with Joe Roseman, and y'all, we are so lucky to have Joe Roseman here helping Diane and doing the ministry of taking care of the sacred space. So back to your big point is when we look at all of the things in the needs versus wants, when people's hair is blowing through because of the windows not being great and energy inefficient, those kinds of things, we also look at, okay, so we're gonna caulk these windows, and then we're gonna have to caulk them again. And then we're throwing good money over bad. We do look at every single one of those. So unless something really goes sideways, now clearly when things are, if all of a sudden, heaven forbids, like it start raining in the chapel or something like that, then of course we would use good common sense and good money sense and if we're gonna have to do the roof, we'll just do the whole thing kind of situation and evaluate that. But those are the thought processes that we have with moving things around. And Joe and Alan and other people go through here and look and say, this is something that can no longer wait. Does that help your question or answer it?
Health and safety comes into play. Okay.
Health and safety,
I
friends.
saw a question from Lila, and then I saw a question from Philip Beal at the back. So we'll get those two.
Thank you for very detailed information. I have a suggestion for the future. It would be helpful to see this ahead of time, if it could be put on some parish communication. It would also be helpful if there could be copies available to look at. I had a million questions, but I'm only going to do one. And that is, in a time of, I would say, national insecurity, with many people losing jobs, etc., one of the things it seems to me is there's a possibility of unanticipated community needs in terms of deportation and people in financial need. I wonder if the budget committee is considering that this certainly comes in terms of social outreach, but I wanted to raise that as a concern.
So I won't speak for the finance committee itself, but I will say that that is a place where clergy discretionary funds. So the outreach committee has some funds that they have discretion over how they direct them, but clergy discretionary funds ends up being a vital component of how we are able to respond in the community. And so clergy discretion funds are funded by people's generosity. They're also funded when we do a wedding or a funeral, and those sacramental acts allow us to reach out in ways in which you're describing. Philip Beal.
Hello. I have a question from an early pie chart that was on the screen regarding the breakdown of the endowment. And I was confused by the numbers, if that was the total amount in each of those pieces of pie, and we're using the interest from those to spin off, or is the money that was, the amounts that were listed on each, the total amount that's being spent for those individual pieces?
So Philip, I saw Ford's hand, so we'll go to Ford next. I will endeavor to answer your question, or maybe, do you want to y'all, Alistair? Alistair.
I believe that was all the amounts that are in there, not the amounts we're spending.
I heard you say that the interest from those were being used in different areas,
Yes.
not just what the endowment from the person who gave the money. And I thought that's kind of a violation of what an endowment is.
Yeah, no, we're preserving the principal, and the principal is growing, and we're using, in some cases, income earned by that money, and in some cases, as long as we're not invading the principal, amounts that it has grown for the specific purposes that the money was given for. Yeah, 2.2, something like that, yes.
Ford.
Yeah, thanks for a very good presentation. So one of the biggest challenges that I think we have and that is recognized is how we will fund the maintenance of this facility over the long term. And I may have missed this, but for expenses that exceed $50,000, how is it anticipated that they will be funded? And then in case this question, your answer doesn't address it, I have a follow-up. But you may answer my second unknown question.
Why not? So that is a very good question, and there's not an all-encompassing answer. One answer is for larger things especially, we may have to get donors to fund them. For some things, they can get paid for from the endowment. And for some things, the Finance Committee is going to need to figure it out.
Okay, you didn't answer my second question. So one of the numbers that was really impressive and I think important again for the future is the $640,000 I think that we received from Bequest. Can you remind us all how that money is allocated currently, just generically?
Well, currently, again, it depends. If it comes, anything that comes in as an undesignated gift, at the moment, the vestry has put in place a policy that will fund the organ, and we are, I believe, planning to revisit that in the middle of the year, in July, to see if we want to continue to do that. Normally, undesignated gifts go to capital and program. Yeah, there's a capital, there's a gifts policy, which because we're in this time of it all going to the organ fund, I'm not as familiar with as I should be. But there is a policy, and undesignated gifts go according to that policy, which currently is to the organ fund.
Ford, I don't know if this is working. We can send you that undesignated gifts and bequests policy. The other thing I would say is that number of almost $600,000, we had one donor who gave about $370,000 to the church for the benefit of another partner nonprofit. So those dollars came in and then they went out. But one of the elements is that is funded in our undesignated gifts and bequests policy is the buildings and grounds principle on the endowment. And I think that augmenting that, as well as getting our operating transfer to capital to be about 5% of our overall operations, is the direction in which we need to head to be sustainable. I saw Susanna Smith.
Right. Good morning, and thank you for a great presentation. On the outreach and social justice category, that also involves the diocesan share. I'm not sure a lot of people realize that we give quite a bit of money to the diocese. Can you tell us what goes to the diocese, and also, is that the full share that the diocese asks?
So we pay our full diocesan share and have all the time that I believe that we've been asked. And so I would say we both fund and receive from the diocese. So right here on this slide, you can see diocesan grants. We're paying, and maybe Alistair's about to tell me the number. We pay $209,000 to the diocese every year that funds diocesan priorities. We are one of those priorities, receiving back about $107,000 in 2024.
So what does that leave for social justice?
Well, I would suggest to you that, in fact, part of what the diocese is funding is social justice.
Right.
If you mean direct grants to separate partner nonprofits,
What we are giving.
separate grants to partner nonprofits are, I think in 2024, it was $65,000.
That's correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
Vera.
I went over to Greensboro. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Vera Reed. I've been a parishioner here for about 10 years. And so originally I'm from St. Pius Church, which is Monsignor Marcaccio's turf. He passed away recently. So that's the Catholic Church of Greensboro I come from. So I went over there after the president was not elected. I was rooting for Kamala. She had lost, and I was very devastated, so I went exactly down the highway.
Vera, do you have a financial question about the presentation?
And so my financial question was for the St. Pius Church, and they refused me. Is there anybody in the Holy Roman Catholic Church willing to go with me to Rome to celebrate the Jubilee in honor of Jesus Christ, and will the church cover me?
So, Vera, thank you for your question. Jubilee years are powerful things. I was actually in Nicaragua for a Jubilee year in 2000 with some Roman Catholics, and that was a powerful enterprise. We're not currently in a position where we're funding missionaries beyond those missionaries that we support in South Africa through the Kwasa program and through our partners in Ecuador, or our diocesan mission partners in Botswana and Costa Rica. And I am going to go do a quick change to the 11:15. You can continue to ask questions of Alistair and Diane. Contact information is on the screen, and Brad and Alistair are here too.
Any other questions? Okay. Let me just real quick, before everybody runs out of here, I should have said this earlier. I want to tell you, you have a very, very dedicated team of volunteers on your finance committee and investment committee. A number of them are here in the room, and since we're all leaving, I'm not going to name them all, but I want to thank them. I'm rotating off, so somebody else will be up here next year, but I can tell you your finances are in very, very good hands with Alistair, with Diane, and with those volunteers. So thank you.